Hello everyone. Since this is either a highlight, a standalone book, or the first episode in a series, I'm jumping in to remind you what the rules are for this podcast. First rule is, no real people stories. That means that any details from our own lives are merely anecdotal, we do not read books about real people, and we are not reading historical fiction. The second rule is that we are basing our analyses off of how the author treats characters and what they put them through. We are not judging the accuracy of the trauma, the accuracy of any actual conditions that may be portrayed, nor the authenticity of a character's reaction to that trauma or that particular condition. This podcast is for entertainment purposes only. The hosts are not trained professionals, and their opinions come solely from personal experience. In this episode, we discuss fictional depictions of trauma and violence that may not be suitable for all audiences. Please take care of yourselves. Specific content warnings for each episode can be found in the show notes. Events in the media are discussed in approximate order of escalation. This episode contains spoilers.
This week on Books That Burn, we are talking about Under the Pendulum Sun, a book about a woman who goes into another world and gets lost. Hi, I'm Nicole.
And I'm Robin, and today on Books That Burn, we have a guest. Would you please introduce yourself?
Yes. Hi, everyone. My name is Luis, they, their pronouns, from the podcast Courting in Color.
Thank you so much for joining us. First, I'm going to get into our factions. We have Kathy, Leon, Ariel Davenport, Mr. Benjamin, Elizabeth Roche, Queen Mab, Kazday, Penamu, and the Fae, generally speaking. So our first topic is Ariel Davenport and disassociation. This book has a lot of characters questioning if they're real, if they actually exist, and what their cosmic relevance is, if they're able to exist at all, if anything can exist. So if disassociation is a trigger for you, just don't read this book. It permeates the whole thing. There's so much of it. That's a disclaimer I would say there.
So this character in particular, we are told right at the very beginning, almost, is a changeling. And then proceeds to characterize this character with some incredibly blatant autistic stereotypes.
Mm-hmm.
Autism is a spectrum, and not everyone presents the same way, and not everyone presents to the same degree. But I should specify that this is not just we have an autistic character that is being called a changeling. This is, we have a changeling character that our point of view character looks at and starts describing with various stereotypical assumptions. Adding to that, oh no, they have too many teeth. It's this really weird, here's some autistic things, and oh no, clearly they're otherworldly and gonna eat me, probably.
I do want to briefly say we're not, this description is not out of anywhere. The author possibly was not even thinking about autistic people at all. I
don't know.
Well, I'm just gonna, let me get the thing out. That's why I said possibly, because we don't know what research they did.
Right.
That there is a real world historical link between, there is a theory that a lot of real-world past historical descriptions of, that person was definitely a changeling, was actually just descriptions of autistic people, and it was allistic people attempting to describe the way they felt unsettled by someone being different and autistic. And so this comparison isn't out of nowhere, and any book that plays changelings straight is likely to run into this, and this, to me, is just one of those. But it's probably going to be more stressful to read as an autistic person.
The one thing that makes me push back against that is that this character, Miss Davenport, straight up says, "Hi, I am being blunt, and I'm telling you things, And then I'm going to tell you that you can't ask about them because that's not allowed. And here, I am a changeling, and so I never felt in, do you care about your human family? I mean, I think I'm supposed to, but I don't. And that's okay, because I'm not real. That's the framing and the language used. Like, she literally comes up and says, hi, I don't do emotion. You're human, right? And it's really not that it's...
The thing that I'm trying to convey is that the way changelings are described is such a laundry list of what it can look like from the outside to be autistic that I don't know.
But
not ready.
The way this character interacts with our main character is not changeling lore. The way this character interacts with the main character is, hi, I'm blunt and I don't do subtle, and I'm going to tell you this and then tell you can't ask. It's very... Okay. It's like, it is the thing that makes allistic people, it's a thing that makes allistic people uncomfortable, and it's not something that I have seen in changeling lore. Like,
okay.
It's this very specific way of talking that doesn't feel like an autistic person wrote it, but it does feel like it is supposed to sound like that.
So,
that's my pushback.
Okay, but in terms of reader experience, you might have an experience like me where you're like, dang it, played Changeling straight again, and it just looks like an autistic person. I'm not sure if this is good or not. And then Nicole's experience of, oh no, this is absolutely on purpose. Why did they do this?
My experience was, wow, this sounds like somebody is parodying me and they didn't listen to me. Quite literally.
The one thing that I will add is, as someone who isn't familiar with like changeling lore prior to like reading this book, wasn't even aware of how they were portrayed outside of like this very specific text. But in hearing both of you talk, I'm like, oh, yeah, like the main characters were definitely very dismissive. They kind of were, they meaning like the main characters were super like dismissive of Ariel Davenport, and then obviously, I mean, I know this is this is not a spoiler-free podcast, but just even the fact that she is the one who is part of the hunt and gets hunted is also very telling. So, if anything, like this character is, for me as a reader, like this character was neglected, right? Like they weren't really given. They have very few positive attributes, but yeah, like with what you are just talking about, definitely just reshapes how I view the character for sure.
Yeah, like that's a good point. That we should mention that like, this character, in terms of trauma, literally gets hunted as a series of shape-changing animals, and then is killed because there had to be a hunt, and she was the one who was expendable.
And she asks to be killed. There's that too. Not in the hunt. She doesn't ask to be hunted, but she basically says like, oh, that was the other thing, is because this character is trying to convince our main character that they are also a changeling, and the way she convinces the main character to kill her is by telling her, hey, you are a changeling, and so you don't have a soul, and so if you kill me, nothing bad will happen to you.
Because you can't sin.
Because you're not human.
Punished. Yeah.
You're not human, and you won't have emotional repercussions because you don't have emotions because you're a changeling.
Yep.
Like, that's a lot.
Yeah, and it also like tells a lot about how Ariel feels about herself, because as much as she said she doesn't feel things, she obviously cares about a whole lot of stuff for someone who nominally doesn't have emotions.
I mean, yeah, and again, for me, like, I definitely was really dismissive of her as a character. As a reader, I was really dismissive of Miss Davenport, Ariel Davenport, Miss Davenport. I was really dismissive of Miss Davenport at the beginning, but then by the end, I'm like, oh, there's something definitely more afoot here, and I for sure was shocked, like when she was part of the hunt, because I was preparing for another character to be a part of that. So, yeah, and I think it's really interesting because part of the dissociation is also like memories, right? And changelings' relationship to memories. I think that's also part of it. That's such an interesting facet of the disassociation. Overall, I was like, I probably should have done more research on Fae world and changelings. But yeah, so.
Yeah, like, because so for anyone who isn't generally familiar with changeling lore, the most common thing that is, and not everything that uses the word changeling in their story does exactly this list of things. Like, I'm reading a series that uses that word but has a totally different thing with it.
Yeah.
But if they play the trope straight, generally it's that a fairy is put in the place of a human child, and the human child is taken away to fairy, and often the human child like is stuck in fairy and like doesn't grow up and is played with in the she for however long they live, which is forever, because nothing bad's gonna happen to them, but they also don't grow up.
And that's fascinating because remember how I was telling y'all before we started recording that I'm watching The Magicians on Netflix, and on The Magicians, now that I think about it, there is a changeling, but they don't talk like that character is not labeled as such, which is why I kept getting really confused as I was reading this book and then watching this other piece of medium. So yeah, thank you. That's like a really good primer for me.
Yeah. So swapped out for human kid. Yep. On to religious trauma. We don't have a specific character listed because it's so much. It's all of them. It's the book.
Yeah.
So the premise is that the main character followed her missionary brother to the Feylands, basically. And did you have any particular thoughts with their religious trauma, Luis?
Yeah, let's actually specifically start with you, because we had kind of talked ahead of time about how like you were not as familiar with the biblical text.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, like, I saw obviously the religion and spirituality stuff like throughout the book, but when it came to like religious trauma, for me, I saw it really more towards like the end with like the plot reveal of how she ended up in the Feylands. Sorry, and by she I mean Kathy, thank you. So I guess I don't have too many thoughts on the religious trauma. So I'd love to hear more from you all, because I'm failing to see maybe where some of it is.
Well, we can start with the thing you're mentioning with like that there is this reveal at the end about the nature of how she actually came to be there, and so the thing that I would note is that nothing fundamentally has changed. Like, no matter what, she still came there and then did whatever she did after there. She has done. Like, you can't change anything. But all of a sudden, there's this kind of like, are you familiar with the term fridge horror?
No.
So fridge horror is the idea that, like, you watch a thing and, you know, it's fine or whatever. You watch a show, read a book, whatever. And then when you get up for a snack in the middle of the night and you open a fridge, all of a sudden you have a thought and you're like, oh no, that's awful. How did oh no. And you're just like, you put together something and the implications of it are horrendous, even though it's not literally spelled out in the text. But the more you think about what it means, the worse and worse it feels. That's fridge horror. Fridge realization is like a general term for like anything that you figure out in that kind of a way.
Right.
Like that's how this thing was foreshadowed earlier in whatever. Oh, cool. But with fridge horror is happening to Kathy in the book because
as we all know, Kathy
the circumstances.
I'm just kidding.
Circumstance. Well, that's got some fridge horror.
I know.
The circumstances that brought her there are different from the ones she thought were in play, even though the text that she read that encouraged her to come isn't different. Finding out who actually sent it, what actually was going on, recontextualizes all of this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And that is stressful, even though it already happened. Like, it didn't, like, it's not like some new bad thing is happening. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of religious trauma is built around, or I should say, a lot of Protestant Christianity's particular brand of religious trauma.
Yeah. Fundamentalist and Protestant.
Yeah, in this book, they are explicitly Protestant Christians. In a alternate reality version of the late 1800s. A particular thing with Protestant Christianity is leans a little bit more towards shame culture than guilt culture. So shame culture is like, you did it and you can't change anything about it, but it's bad. That thing you did, you shouldn't have.
Right.
And so with like the thing with the salt, she already had all that salt, and the particular way that she had it, there's something with the salt, but the way that she had it isn't different. She can't go back, she can't change it, but she retroactively has all this stress around this thing with the salt, and like, did she need it? Did she not? In what way did she need it? And like, there's all these little clues that they put in to like, basically to make them like stress and think that things are different than they were, and to recontextualize that past. And then Mr. Benjamin is, I'd say, has religious trauma. He's like, or he's trying to understand what all of this means, and then keeps being stressed out that they don't have any answers to offer him, because he points out all of these very real inconsistencies in the Bible. Like, not the reason that I am personally an atheist, but definitely one of the things that contributed was exactly the kind of stuff that Benjamin is bringing up. Yeah. Nicole, did you have any thoughts?
Yeah, speaking of Benjamin, so he quite literally comes up and says, I think my destiny is to be a martyr. And so tomorrow I must die. Like, well, that's not inconsistent with the framing that he has been given. But it was, I will say this, it was the opposite kind of religious trauma that I thought was going to happen, because I definitely thought it was going to go more the Crusaders route. And it didn't. Instead, it went the suicidal route, which, like, okay.
Right, like the self-sacrificing route.
Yeah. Yeah, and I did not know. Like, I thought there was going to be, like, the opposite justification with the hunt itself. And then it wasn't, which was, I don't want to say better. But yeah, that was the thing that really struck me. Plus our third topic, which we will get into a little bit more religious context with that. But like that justification of like this doesn't make well, especially with him, you know, like you're saying, like asking about things that don't make sense, and then coming in with, well, the ultimate goal is to die for the cause,
right?
Yeah, and so goodbye, and like, whoa, hold on.
And I was going to say part of the religious so I think for me, like, I'm thinking more of religious impact, right? So what is the impact of religion? And I think a byproduct is obviously trauma, but I think the religious impact for me is also the sense of individualism, right? The martyrdom, for sure, I think is like all wrapped up into it. And even as you think about some of the other characters, you know, Kathy, Leon, they're all pursuing individual interests that is informed by their like religious and spiritual upbringing. Because for me, like, my journey with religion now currently where I'm at is it's not individualistic, it's communal, it looks something a little bit different. So I think for me, like, the other layer I would add with religious trauma is like the impact of religion is so focused on the individual, but it's masked sometimes for the benefit of all. But really, like, I mean, martyrdom is singular, right?
Yeah.
It is often thought about as singular.
Yeah, absolutely.
And also, like, so you made a really good point with like the individual nature of it, because even something like, well, no matter what, Ariel has to die. But if Kathy does it, then it's fine, and the net amount of sin is lower.
Mm-hmm.
But no matter what, she's still dead, and so I don't think it should matter which of the two of them did it. But the framing offered to Kathy in that moment to soothe her is, well, if you do it, it'll be fine.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like with this individual thing. I also had the thought that I actually was pretty sure that it was not going to be Benjamin. I was thinking maybe it was going to be the salamander, but I specifically did not think it would be Benjamin who died, because Benjamin wanted to die, and Benjamin does not get what he wants. He doesn't get any of the answers he wants. Benjamin never gets anything that Benjamin wants, and he's never quite satisfied. And if the book had made him a martyr, he would have gotten something he wanted and been satisfied. But the narrative consistently denies him that. So, that's why I was pretty sure he was going to make it through the book.
Yeah, there's a lot of, like, just with Benjamin as a person, or as a character, there's a lot of just, like, he is okay with things not making sense and not lining up and not getting what he wants. But it's fine, because that's what my pastor says.
Right.
Like, there's a little bit of that, just like, everything is fine, pretend it's not falling apart because my leader says so.
Mm-hmm.
And that, I think that also qualifies.
Yeah, and he's so desperate for that guidance that he's like, well, you're the sister of the Reverend, therefore,
right, like 6 degrees of separation, like you tell me it's fine. Like,
yeah,
which I think that's even
somebody.
an interesting way of Benjamin's interaction, right? If he's so dogmatic, he's actually, you would think he's so dogmatic,
right.
But he, like y'all are saying, is looking for any kind of connection. So I think, like, Benjamin, again, like, just reflecting on it, like, Benjamin might be the most, like, whole character in his complexity, right? Like, he's subscribed to this worldview, this dogma, but he also is questioning it, like we've said before, and he's not fully in it because he's going outside of, I always get my preacher pastor titles confused, but he's going to someone else. He's going to the 6 degrees of separation, as was said before.
Yeah, he has the zeal of the new convert without all the years of unspoken things where you just know we don't worry about that. He doesn't have those, like, internal guards of, oh, yeah, we all know that those two different descriptions of creation are inconsistent, but we don't talk about that. He doesn't have it, so he asks, and then they don't have any answers for him because they've been not talking about it. On to the last topic, which is incest. And we didn't list the character names because that would be a spoiler if you're just reading the notes. But surprise, it's the two main characters. It's Kathy and Leon.
Surprise, okay, it's the siblings.
Yeah. So, okay, so one of the things that this does with the framing of it is they think they're siblings, and so they have a lot of longing and mutual pining, and then they don't do anything. And it turns out Leon actually went to the Feylands to get away from the temptation of Kathy. Then they think they're they think they're not siblings because they think that Kathy is a changeling. And they're like, oh my goodness, we can guilt-free do the things we have wanted to do. And then they find out, no, Kathy's not a changeling. You guys just definitely did incest. And not in the, like, sort of weird adopted sibling squick. We have the, no, you're blood siblings, and this was definitely incest. So that's the brief summary of the wild swings back and forth with this, almost like a pendulum. Anyway,
okay.
What are your thoughts on this? two of you.
Can I just point out something that just occurred to me?
Sure.
Yeah.
So, our last topic was about the biblical harm and context of this book a little bit, right?
Mm-hmm.
And Robin had mentioned earlier that their biblical touchstone for second instance of incest, when they talked about it.
Oh, there's 2 Song of Solomon quotes.
There's two Song of Solomon quotes. There is incest in the Bible.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
There's a lot of it.
There's a lot of it. And there's a lot of well, God says this is fine incest in the Bible, in the Old Testament specifically. So, how come they didn't reach for biblical justification that is actually a little bit
because they have all of the layers of dogma and years of interpretation, and I think one of the things one of the things this book is pointing out, and we're getting a little bit on the religious thing, but one of the things that this book is pointing out subtly is the hypocrisy that results in trying to take it all literally. And I think if they had tried to use, well, incest is in the Bible, and so we're actually fine, it would have been consistent with the book they're claiming to follow, but inconsistent with the traditions coming out of that they grew up in. And so it doesn't occur to them, because they're so immersed in the guilt culture, that it doesn't occur to them to say, well, frequently but not consistently, the Bible's cool with incest, therefore we're fine. They didn't do that because
I feel like this is where
this other pressure.
I'm not going to get into this because this isn't super our topic itself, but I think this is where that, what we had talked about before recording about me having a different experience of this book than both of you kind of comes in, because I definitely look at it as, oh no, I have seen real life people. They don't point to it felt like the author was pretending that these things weren't actually there because reasons, and then it just felt like it sidestepped its own point. But I realize that that's because I have the biblical context for those things, which is one of the reasons I'm not a fan of there I don't know, there's just it felt like it was well, we're going to pretend we're not doing this, even though the thing that we definitely are doing is definitely in there, I guess. But yeah, that occurred to me just now as we were talking about this, they definitely just didn't put that thing in there, and then they chose something else. I don't know.
So,
but I think that pick and choose. Yeah. But I think that pick and choosiness is religion, right? And I think
totally, absolutely.
Because you have people talk about their religious and spiritual identity as pick and choose and what we subscribe to. And I think what's interesting is, and I know this is not the point of this podcast, not necessarily to go into the literary symbolism and those types of things, but I think the intros into each chapter, pulling from Songs of Solomon and all these other literary texts, I think that's extra for us as the reader. We shouldn't assume that the characters, though they have access to that knowledge and are drawing from the knowledge. I think for my experience as the reader was it sets up the chapter. And so I shouldn't it informs my reading of the chapter, but it doesn't inform the world at that moment for the characters to the extent that it informs my reading of the chapter. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
I definitely don't think that Kathy sat down to read some Song of Solomon after the first time.
right. And was oh, let me do this.
Oh, I totally read that as Kathy went back to her Bible and was quick, I need to have something to justify myself.
No, I never assumed
I'm not assuming that's in the book, but that was definitely my headcanon, was that she was oh, hold on, I need context for this.
No, I usually emotionally think of those as the author pointing out where they want your headspace to be at that moment.
Right.
And to me, whether or not the characters
which is literally why that
incest,
scene feels like justification to me. Because the author is Song of Solomon, this is fine.
Mm-hmm. No.
But I think what I will maybe add is, so obviously both of them had the desire for one another, right? Leon's was so great that he had to go to the Phalanx, as we talked about. So he knows what he's doing is wrong. Kathy, we are aware that she had this attraction, but it's not that until she's a changeling that she acts upon it, right? So I think this like thought, it gets into the sin versus the sinner debate, right? Of like religion.
Oh no, it happens before.
Right?
I think.
Oh, does it? Okay, I missed.
At the party reveal?
No, okay, no, him seeing her, but they don't do anything.
They
like,
don't.
she
Right,
didn't
so there's the
decide to be
longing.
naked
So there's
in front
the
of him.
longing.
Oh, I thought they did.
No, they did nothing at the party. They didn't do anything until after she thought she found out that she was a changeling.
Right.
I tracked that very carefully.
All right.
Yeah,
Right.
no,
Yes.
the
Yeah,
Fae,
and there's-
Queen
there's-
Mab was messing with them by making her look naked in front of him, and she
Right.
fled. They did nothing.
All right.
Does that help?
No.
Yeah, it doesn't help, but like, yeah, I thought the incest, again, I knew nothing about this book, have no context of how fantasy stuff works outside of, I mean, really my foray into fantasy is always like around like magical worlds. And so I was like, oh, this is different. I was not ready for this shift. But yeah, it was a journey for me. And so I just as a reader was like, okay, well, this is part of the world. I'm stepping into it. Like, you know, for me, this is not like, it did not evoke a visceral response except like, wait, what? Why is this?
Yeah,
What purpose does this serve?
Ugh.
To me, it is, so it's being used by the Fae, specifically Queen Mab, to torment them.
But it's not. But it's a thing that they, or that they definitely like is heavily implied that they both wanted prior to go. So like Queen Mab is just exposing it. She didn't make it up.
Yeah. Well, and that's what she says at the end, right? She's like, don't you feel so much better? Like my interpretation of it is she basically says like, well, don't you feel so much better? Like I gave you the opportunity to like succumb to your desires, right? And I don't think her framing is sin. I think it's like, you should be thanking me that I gave you this space to be, you know, who you are, your true innate human nature. Which again, I think I was talking before we started recording about how like this definitely brought me back to like high school English classes debating like what is human nature and what informs human nature and what is very gender language, but the nature of man, right? Man's the real nature of man is like that of beast, and like what happens if he gives over to like all those things. Again, very gender language, and I acknowledge it, but towards the end I felt like that was reiterated of like
the book,
go ahead.
Yeah, the book definitely talks about the way the sexism in their society treated the two of them as different, and so I don't think gendered language is necessarily out of place when discussing these particular characters, because it does.
They are also
it does specifically call out the way they're treated differently because of that. It doesn't just let it lie. Like, the only reason she needed his help to interpret the language stuff towards the end is because she literally wasn't allowed to do all the language learning that he got because he was a guy. I noticed that.
Yeah.
So I really liked this book. And if it turns out to be part of the beginning of a series rather than being a standalone, I'm definitely planning on reading the others. I can tell Nicole is not.
Yeah. I like the concepts. I like the plot.
Right.
Loosely.
I think I would watch an hour long. I think I would watch. I'd either watch an hour long YouTube essay or listen to future episodes of this podcast that talk about it. But I don't know if I would read books 2 and 3 or however many more come in the series.
Yeah, and I'm mentioning that here mostly because I think like how you're with what we talked about in chapter 1 or in section 1 with the way that changelings are discussed, and then also here with the incest, how much you're okay with the very subtle, like, I think things are called out and the book definitely has an angle, but it is subtle enough, and one of the things that it's addressing is hypocrisy, that like I believe Nicole said off the recording, that leaves the space to use the exact same thing to justify an opposite behavior. And I think if that's gonna stress you out as it relates to the topic of incest, if this book has that, it's about that. And then if later books have that as well, then maybe this isn't the series for you. But if you're like, oh, what are they gonna do with that, which is my reaction, then I loved this book.
I think if this author were to release something else that did not have incest and was in a fully created world instead of ostensibly an extension of our real world that just so happened to be very Christian based with the main characters, I would totally read a incest-free 100% high fantasy book by this author. I love the way they describe things. I love what they have made up in this world. I like their concepts and ideas. Yeah, exactly. Really, honestly, the three things that we talked about in these episodes are like three things where the way it was done felt like it was reinforcing an idea instead of undermining it. And I'm not cool with that.
And I absolutely read it as like undermining and pointing out hypocrisy. Because the conclusion with the incest is, like, they, I think, very naively decide, if this hell is hell, let's go further down in it, because we already know we have done the incest. We already know our worst thing we've ever done. There's no more ways they can hurt us. And I'm
Which is a very, very...
Oh, babies. Oh, babies. Hell can hurt you so much more.
Right. There's like multiple layers of it.
But you're going to get messed up in future. If there's a future anything, like, oh, that's so bad.
But that is such like a fundamentalist Christian way of looking at it. Like, well, if you flip the switch, heaven or hell, and I messed up once, I might as well just do whatever. It's like, oh,
well, and they talk about repentance. I can't remember how they frame it, but it's kind of like they definitely mention it, right? Like how are your sins forgiven, and like what do you have to do? I think the one thing that I'll kind of maybe add to the incest, we were talking before about how like obviously it's in the Bible. I wonder if there's a way that you could also look at this as like a recreation. Like, could this world exist as a biblical world too, where, you know, Mab is kind of this like high entity. I don't want to necessarily say God, but right. And then could like the two main characters be representative of like, you know, Adam and Eve, and like I think I know my biblical history enough where there's incest that happened that allowed for the, you know, creation of humankind. So I think that's another way I can look at it. I was like, you can like retextualize this world to just be its own biblical world, if that makes sense.
They do have two characters. Say
that's pretty much what's happening.
They do have two characters that are pretty heavily contextualized as angels.
Right.
So like,
and with all the stuff in the creation myth that they're slowly translating, to me it feels like not that these two humans are particularly Adam and Eve, but that it is completely within the literal text of the book to interpret them as stand-ins. Because, you know, echoing past patterns is extremely biblical, especially if you echo the past pattern in a way that makes it even worse for the second people to do the pattern. I think that, yeah, Luis, that absolutely is consistent with this book, and I would argue that in a way that is nearly canon, especially with if Queen Mab is the entity that is speaking in the translated text, and if it's not Queen Mab, it's whoever's above Queen Mab, and I don't think there's anyone above Queen Mab, so I'm pretty sure it's her.
I don't think we have enough context for that, because the court has multiple members and we don't meet them. Just putting that out there. We don't actually know what her status on the court is, so to speak.
No, that's a good point. Yeah. I think I just like naturally assumed that she was the top tier.
No, she's just the only one with the face. That's what it is that she's the one that's human relatable because she has a human face.
Yeah.
All right. We should hit stop. We did go to 16 minutes.
It's okay.
Man, that movie was excellent.
It really was. Totally blew my expectations away.
I know, right? Now I really want to tell everyone about it. But I'm not sure how.
Yeah. If only there was a podcast dedicated to reviewing films and discussing the latest news and trailers on upcoming films. That would be nice.
Yes, for sure. And we can call it The Cineguy Show.
What? No. It will be called Real Movie Critic Unleashed.
No. How about Cineguy featuring Real Movie Critic?
How about the Real Movie Critic and his sidekick, the Cineguy?
CG and RMC.
RMC and CG!
The Real Movie Critic versus the Cineguy. Only at CertainPOV.com or wherever you get your podcasts.
You're going down, critic.
Bring it on, guy.
On to the wrap-up and ratings. For our gratuity rating for disassociation, Okay. I have a thought.
Okay.
My thought is, because it talks so much about the ideation surrounding this, and there's so much discussion of it, and given the nature of this thing in the first place, I feel like it is either moderate or severe.
My personal feeling is that since I would say moderate is a fair depiction.
Yeah, I think for me, I'm also somewhere between mild and moderate. I think it has prevalence, and it's talked about, and for me, it falls to frequency, right? Like how often it is mentioned or referred. So somewhere between mild and moderate.
I feel like
the kind of problem that we run into when our trauma that we're discussing is neglect. Like some of these traumas that are very quiet are harder to pin down on the gratuity rating.
Or ones that are just more acceptable in our current society. And so like it doesn't seem like it is this thing because it's not as bad as insert thing here. Okay, well, all three of us overlapped on moderate.
Yeah,
so
we can do that.
I feel pretty good about that, actually. This is one where I will just put a caveat for our audience. This might feel like it is more severe if you have a particular background or understanding of certain real world topics. And I would even encourage our listeners with no reservation, if you want to know more but don't want to listen.
In my review.
Oh, fair enough. It is in Robin's review.
It's in the written review that will be linked in the show notes.
Awesome.
If you'd like to get those details.
Yeah. So yeah, there's some stuff in there where the more context you have, the worse it is. But the depiction of it is not as severe without context, which is interesting to say.
Yeah. All right. For the religious trauma, what do you two think?
This is like the theme, and it is forever.
Oh yeah, it's the whole thing.
It's the whole book. But I think this one I think because of the main, there are several points here that get incredibly graphic as a concept and as a depiction. And I'm not going to go into spoiler territories. But if you look at our content warnings for this section, I'm going to go severe. Just for, there's one scene that has a kind of a visceral physical depiction, and there's another scene that has a request that a character makes of another, actually two scenes where you have a request that a character makes of another character that I think shoves it into severity. And it's a blunt, in your face, this is the thing that is happening, and there is nothing, there's like, it is the thing, and the characters on screen grapple with it, and there's nothing stopping you as a reader from it being the only thing happening. And I think that pushes it into severity. Did we lose Robin?
No, you didn't. I was just thinking, yeah, given what we are at least told that this place is, whether or not they're lying, whether or not it's true, that what they are told the place is, I think, undergirds and contextualizes all of the rest of them being very, very stressed out.
Mm-hmm.
And since that flavors everything else. I agree with severe.
Yeah, me too. Before I was talking about, for me, this book was more about religious impact is how I framed it for myself, as opposed to religious trauma. And I mean, and the impact of religion is definitely very felt. And even if it's not frequent, the isolated incidents themselves are so heavy that for me, that definitely makes it severe. And obviously adding them all together, it's very severe. But yeah, so yeah, severe. I agree.
Okay. All right. Incest. So.
This is tough because no, it's not. It's severe. Actually, is it severe or is it torture porn? Are we meant to look at this and
no, I don't
think it's at that.
I don't think it's torture porn.
I think the characters would love it if we said this was fine. But
yeah, I mean, for like an extremely nuanced discussion, like extremely, I would be tempted, I don't know if I'd be right, but I'd be tempted to argue that the incest isn't the trauma, the religious trauma about their thoughts about it are the trauma. But
I mean, yeah.
I think that because they aren't,
but depiction for abusive, a reader.
Yeah, given the way that incest as a topic is often intertwined with abuse, this version of it is not.
That's true.
And so I just want to, let people know that this isn't a code word for that.
No, this is incredibly consensual.
Yeah, it's completely consensual. So I would actually argue that most of the actual thing is either backstory or moderate.
Well, we do have on-screen depictions.
That's why off-screen or moderate. Because there's a lot of fade to black. There's most of what they're actually doing is being near each other and liking each other a whole lot. That's most of what we see. It's actually not that much. It's just all the talking about it and the religious framing of it. And discussion of the way they're upset when they do or don't think this is what actually happened. That's what leads to this emotional roller coaster, which is a bit of a ride. But I don't think the actual incest was a very severe trauma.
All right. Moderate feels moderate / off screen. We can't put it fully off screen, but
yeah. Moderate, but significant portions that could have kicked it up to severe are off screen, and I think it's important to note that.
Yeah, I think before, I can't remember that we were talking about this before we started recording or after, but I think also, to me, the incest could be, somewhere between off-screen and moderate. But if someone has experience, in whatever way with incest, and their reaction they could view it, very severe or maybe even torture porn. Right. So for me, I would agree. I think fade to black. Sometimes it happens. Sometimes it happens. Sometimes it doesn't. But it's just icky. I know that's not a rating, but it's just icky.
well, we can talk about that in the care portion too, because that kind of bleeds over into a traumatic depiction can have more care and guard for its reader, and I feel like that's part of that discussion even.
I've had a kind of weird month and a half where a shocking number of books I've read have involved incest. And so, of them, I'm telling you, this one is not severe.
Well, no, that's not how that works, though.
No, I know.
Okay, all right.
I know. But just...
That's not what that means.
Know that the book could have made it worse, is what I think what you're trying to say.
Oh, that's not...
I'm saying that to me, this feels like a... part of what I'm trying to convey is that there's always going to be the possibility that someone has a very particular trigger for a thing, and that's the point of us having these content warnings, because if someone knows that that's a hard stop, no way, no go, they need to stay away from this book, That's why we list the CWs, so that you have a heads up whether or not someone who doesn't have that as a particular trigger could be okay. And so I don't want to say it's severe because as a trauma, this one is culturally icky, therefore that it's in the book at all means it has to be severe. I don't believe that. I don't think that's a good way to frame
that's not the
these.
framing we're arguing for.
Okay, yeah, it sounded a little bit like it could be that, and so I wanted to specifically say I don't think that works.
No, I don't think we're arguing for that at all.
Okay, good. So with that, is the trauma integral, interchangeable, or irrelevant? So integral means that if you took it out, it's a totally different story. Could be a good story, but it's a totally different story. Interchangeable means it didn't have to be that, but it had to be something. And then irrelevant means you could take it out and not even notice. You might not even have to rearrange anything. For the disassociation.
It's interchangeable, I think.
Yeah. There's a lot of ways doubting can happen.
Yeah.
And, with the religious angle, I think a thing that this book needs is doubt because, we're going to have a missionary go somewhere. Like, this shape of the general story. It needed doubting thing. It just didn't have to be this.
Yeah, it didn't have to be this. I mean, I could very easily... We've read books where this is... it could totally have been a... instead of this particular thing, for example, it could have just been a, like, are we still alive question? Right. Or it could have been a fabric of the soul question, or a, there's so many other angles that still fit in the same themes that it absolutely could have been, and this one was not.
Anything that's shaped like doubt could go here. Or most things that are shaped like doubt
anything
could go here.
That, honestly, if it had been something else, I bet our topic would have been gaslighting again. But, like...
Probably.
pretty much anything where you can do that and, like, warp someone's sense of reality would have fit in here pretty well.
Yeah. I agree.
Yep. All right. Luis, what do you think for the religious trauma? Integral, interchangeable, or irrelevant?
I think it's integral. I mean, I feel like what this book ultimately is trying to convey is a commentary around, religious dogma. I'm trying really hard not to do the spoilers. Religious dogma. So it's integral. I mean, I think, so I would say the religious trauma is integral because I think, I don't know if there'd be a specific way to talk about the trauma that is in this book without tying it to religion.
Yeah.
I mean, because even the other two are
linked to this one.
Are linked and contextualized by this religious framing. Yeah.
Makes sense to me.
All right. And then for the incest, okay. As much as I do think it did fit the story,
I think it's irrelevant.
It's irrelevant. It could have been.
I think that might be part of my problem with it, actually, is like that did not have to be there or happen or at all. Like, what was the point of this? You just wanted to tell this story, I think. Like,
I think
why?
I think that the reason it was chosen is, back to the religious trauma. It is thematically significant.
Maybe, but like, okay, this is going to sound weird. At least then make it... I've never said this about any other irrelevant... That's not true. I have, actually, way back in one of our very first episodes. But this one feels like if you're going to pick this particular trauma, at least make it mean something. And I think I've had this opinion twice before, actually. So it's not out of the blue, but I'm not treating this book different, I promise. But that's what this particular one felt like to me. Like, if you're gonna go this angle, make it matter instead of it just feeling like the story you wanted to tell. Like, wanting to tell a certain story isn't bad. I should be clear.
And that's, I think, for me, the incest is interchangeable because I think the incest really impacts the character's decision in the final moments.
That's a good point.
Right? So I think it's interchangeable that if this is like a spoiler, please feel free to let me know.
Well, you say they had to make a choice, and their
choice they have to make
a
choice
on
the sin they choose to give into this particular one, or sorry, any sin they probably could have chosen would have still led them to do the action they wanted to do at the end. I think for heightened purposes, they picked this one for shock, maybe. I don't know.
But that wasn't very. It wasn't very shocking because it was there the whole time.
I really think it's because it fits into all the religious stuff. Like to me, it's like, this makes sense to be the one. I recognize that the book could have worked with a different one. Like, I don't know. It makes sense to me that this is the thing that they picked for the book. And I know it doesn't to you, Nicole, but
it's not that it doesn't make sense, is that
you don't like it.
There are so many other things that would have also made sense, and this one is such a decision to choose.
Mm-hmm.
I guess.
And I think for me, the shock comes in as someone who doesn't read fantasy, right? That I'm like, the fantasy books that I read don't really involve incest.
Exactly.
Like sometimes there's like overt sexuality, right? And there may be other things. So that for me, that was shocking as someone who doesn't really read fantasy. I'm like, it would have been, I was like, maybe I did need, maybe not even a content warning for my own self, but like it would have been like reading the back of the book, you cannot tell that is what's even gonna be part of the book. So I think that feels a little like, I don't know, but yeah. So for me, I just wanted to contextualize why I was shocked.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I guess when I'm thinking shocking, I wasn't thinking like as a concept in a story. Gotcha. I was thinking more like we didn't know it was coming and then it appears, but because like this book foreshadows it forever,
right?
Like to the point where I had to actually check that they were related within 2 chapters, and I was like, yeah, why is this the internal monologue you have? Like what? Okay, sure. And then it got worse. And to be fair, in the fantasy books I read, this is not a common theme, despite what Game of Thrones wants to make you think. Wants to put on screen, too. Yeah, no, I guess interchangeable. It feels like a very...
I do apologize, Lise, because this is one of the rare books where neither of us had read it yet, and so I wasn't in a position to give you that content warning, and I am sorry about that.
No, it's totally okay. Yeah, and I think it's a, for me as a reader, right, and you know, and I'm not impacted by incest, in like, anyway, it's not triggering for me in that in that way. So like, as a reader, I always like, as a person even, I just like to push on my own self of like, ooh, why is this eliciting a response in me? It really makes me question the author's choice in doing this.
It's
and trying to understand, right? As opposed to like necessarily admonishing or what have you. It makes me be like, ooh, like why this?
Yeah.
I think the thing we're dancing around is it's a cultural taboo. And so as much as I can say, hey, I really think that this is the appropriate one for the book, we're all feeling like
it's more than that.
I think that that's definitely a lot of it.
I mean,
I'm not saying it's not
I'm
more
not
than that.
saying that is none of it, but I will say this: things being a cultural taboo does not really emotionally impact me. There are a lot of things that I don't do them because in our culture we're not okay with it, but that doesn't mean that I am even bothered if somebody else is doing that. That that is not a thing that elicits an emotional reaction in me in general. The thing that is different about incest from other cultural taboos is the direct scientific problems that come specifically from offspring from this thing.
Right.
And it is not oh no, society says don't. Like, that's not what this is. Society says don't because you are almost guaranteeing that any potential offspring from that coupling will have problems. Like, that is a thing. And not problems in the, oh no, they look different or have this deformity, but problems as in, like, maybe their lungs don't work. Maybe they, like, things that will kill you. And historically, this particular trauma has been the cause for, like, just a lot of stuff. Like, a lot of stuff culturally, a lot of stuff genetically, a lot of problems that come about, a lot of eugenics have happened in the name of, like, keeping a family line or a royal line so-called pure and then allowing nothing to touch that. And it's more than just our society says no. It's, no, this is not a thing that is just without repercussions if society was fine with it. No, and I think that's the thing that makes me just like, well, yeah, and we talk about other traumas like, well, why did you put this character through that thing? And here I feel like it's a similar like, well, why did you do this one? And like we even talked in our discussion about a different book that handles incest in a way that does not come with all that baggage. I love that book. I think that series is awesome.
Mm-hmm.
But the incest in that series has no genetic complication components and also none of the other historical context for it because of who and what the characters are. It's a totally different thing, and that does not bother me in the slightest.
Well, yeah,
this does.
No, I understand that. I really think that given the particular religious framing and also when the book is set and where the book is set, I think that it's designed as a commentary and I do think it works, but I also recognize the like hesitation and perhaps revulsion that is probably meant to be invoked by it. So, anyway,
yeah.
As to whether things were treated with care, halfway through our list.
We're more than halfway through.
We're almost there. Disassociation.
No. No.
Yeah, no, that had no care.
No care. No care. Felt like very little thought. Seemingly no understanding or even commentary on this thing that they were depicting. Just no.
Yeah. No. The religious trauma. I think there was a lot of care, like talking in circles amounts of care.
Yeah.
Like, things are telegraphed a mile away. Like, you have so much time to decide, I don't want this, I'm done. Or, I'm totally fine with this, let's keep going. It's very slowly escalates. And even the escalation is mostly awful for the characters. And I don't think necessarily for a reader. Like, there is an escalation. It's just, I didn't feel it on me. I was like, oh, they're really in trouble, aren't they?
Luis, what did you think? I'm still not sure how I feel about this one.
Yeah, for
religious trauma.
For religious trauma.
Yeah.
I can agree if I frame it in the fact that it was treated with care by rooting it in realism, right? Like it felt very real, like this type of religious trauma does and can happen in the real world. So there's truth to it. And I guess in that way I can say that it was treated with care.
Well, if you're feeling like it needs a caveat, then maybe it's enough.
Oh, then maybe not.
Then maybe enough care. Because if you're like, if I frame it exactly this way, it's fine. I'm like, Luis, that doesn't sound fine.
Especially when if you frame it as being in the real world, well, then the real people walking around with that trauma, it's more relatable and not less.
Yeah. I think it's weird to talk about like religious trauma being like, oh yeah, this was done with care. Because I think to what we were talking about before, it's like, well, what does the character gain from experiencing this trauma, and is like the lesson that they learn, is the journey for that lesson that's informed by the religious trauma that they experience, is that care, right? I don't know.
One of the things that we talk about is that one of the ways to do care is to make it very clear that something happened to the character without necessarily dragging the reader through all of the details.
Yeah.
And that's part of why I feel like this was treated with care or enough care, because unless the Fae show up, we are unlikely to deal with the precise and stressful blend of internal thought and machinations that the characters have to deal with. I feel like that, and we talk about magical analogs on this podcast, and I think in this case, that is one of the magical analogs, is that we have this, like, separation, this filter. I
would like to argue, I think I've made up my mind.
Okay.
I would actually like to argue that the things that both of you two have said have pushed it to no care in my head.
Okay.
Because, yes, Robin, it is correct that you, as the person you are, reading this is not... Reading this provides a buffer because it is real. And, Luis, that realism allows you to, like, kind of contextualize it. But I would argue that for somebody to whom the history of Christian colonialism is not just a thing that used to happen, hearing what is ostensibly the colonizer, the Christian missionary, literally, debating about the ethics of, well, is it even worth helping them, and what if they just die?
I was thinking of it as like, it going very badly for the colonizer this time around, but I do see how,
But that's not the context that we get for the majority of this book.
Yeah.
The context we get is that they are pushing that they're correct and trying to influence this other culture and trying to have their way and trying to have converts and trying to, and specifically with this trauma, we have that one thing that the one convert is advocating for that is just not great.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that pushes it to no care, because I think if you are someone to whom that very, very real history does not feel like the distant past, I don't think there's any care taken for that readership at all.
I really disagree. I think it's okay if we say not enough, but I really don't feel like it's no care. I really don't. Like, I can meet you on not enough, but I really don't think it's no care. Because
I'm okay with not enough, and also maybe even adding to our content warnings for the book, that there are pretty major characters in this book that advocate for Christian conversion as a plot and a lifestyle.
Yeah.
Incest. Care? How do we feel?
I actually do think either care or enough care, because everybody's consenting.
Everybody is consensual and an adult.
Everyone is consensual. Everyone is an adult. You were talking about the possible negative consequences with it. I would argue that where they are, they're unlikely to have to deal with any of those. Like,
that is true. That is a point for care. It's not a point for the other categories, I would argue, but it is a point for care.
That's why I said it here.
Yeah.
Like, the only people hurt by this is them, and they seem to make their peace with it.
Could I add, like, one dimension? So I hear y'all when you say, like, all the characters who engaged in incest consented, but what do we do with the reader and not even knowing that incest was in this book, and they haven't consented to, like, reading it, right?
That is a very good question, actually.
So what I would say is the book telegraphs it for a really long time.
But that's not the same.
No, I do think that does count for care, because the book spends a very long time going, hey, they're interested.
Mm-hmm.
You have so long to decide, I don't want to know where that's going. Like, the book, it's not like there's nothing and then they're making out. Like, it's not that. Like, it lets you know that we get more warning about this than we do about the death that happens in the book.
Right.
Like, this is I really, really think that this had a lot of care. I'm fine with saying enough, but I don't think it's not enough or no. I think this really was handled with care.
I can't agree to yes,
right,
but I can meet you on enough, or even your mileage may vary.
Because you have so long, like, not trying to, like, put on the reader, but, like, talking about the, like, whether that was my alarm to do this recording on time, whether books give you a heads up and let you emotionally brace for things that's going to happen. I don't know how much more emotionally braced you can be than having teased for 200 pages that these characters who might do an incest later do like each other and are mutually interested. I don't know how more you can telegraph that.
Yeah.
So much ground is laid.
I would argue, though, that the telegraphing is not separate from the incest as regards to reader experience.
And I would say like attraction and then like lust are two separate things, right? So, I would say like attraction / desire is separate than lust. To me, lust feels like there's an action tied to it, how I'm defining it. So like, just because you can tease it, then to actually read it is like, oh, okay. So we went there, right?
Yeah. But I think
that's part of the book, right? Like at the end, it's kind of this is a spoiler anyway. So it is
at the end, a thing happens, and
at the end, a thing happens where we know why this trauma was done for the reason it was done, or why it happened.
The
right?
in-universe justification, yeah.
The in-universe justification. So it has a reason, so it's not random, but. Yeah, I mean, also, I definitely just added a layer that probably wasn't in the original intent of the question, but I do.
It's all in the intent. It's all fine. That's the
cool.
Yeah, add layers. That's fine. We don't have pre-prescribed layers for this.
I really do strongly feel.
I really feel like you just. I feel like this, and this is not a negative thing. I feel like this is one where the particular traumas we're discussing were things that, whether or not they resonated with you, they didn't resonate in a negative sense, which doesn't mean... I think like maybe this book made sense to you, but that doesn't mean necessarily that it was treated with care. It's just that it made sense to you and it felt fine, and so it didn't impact you. I love this book. Yeah, and I like some of the things in it that are not the plot. and like that's the thing where I would argue that you having a positive experience does not mean we can rate this as treated just with care, because like just because this thing didn't bother you doesn't mean that it's fine, which is not a negative. I'm glad you really like this book.
Yeah, I really like it, and I really do think that
I know you do, but two other people have a very different experience with this book. Or with parts of this book, because I know, Luis, you were okay with some stuff that I'm not okay with. But in general, I think we should say not enough, but that doesn't mean it's a bad book.
Yeah. Just don't like it when all the traumas we're discussing end up with not enough and not enough, especially when I vehemently disagree.
To be fair, one of my favorite books that we started on the list, because we basically started this podcast by looking at my bookshelf, because I had everything. One of those books, we said that everything was pretty severe and treated with very little care. So this is not a knock on a book that you enjoyed. This is just... Yeah.
But there you agreed, and here I'm like, I don't agree. Why are you saying a thing I don't like about a book I liked?
Well,
and
that's okay.
But
that's okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm not used to that happening.
I know.
Okay. For the point of view for trauma and aftermath, we get some disassociation from the point of view character, but the main person who is speaking about their disassociation is not the point of view character.
Yeah, which is odd. So I mean, it's still our point of view character kind of contextualizing it a lot. Like literally contextualizing what the other person said as though they weren't the one saying it, which is fun.
I mean, there is the quick version of this section, which is we only have one point of view character for the whole book.
Yeah, we have one one voice for this book.
It's like when we did the Hunger Games and we're like, all right, it's Katniss again.
Katniss again. Katniss forever. No voice but Katniss. No thoughts but Katniss. Just Katniss. And then that one time that President Snow had an inner monologue about how evil he was. And back to Katniss. Like, that was that book review.
Well, and sorry, just really quickly, I was going to say that makes me think about y'all talking about the Hunger Games. It's like, that's the fantasy stuff that I like. This is like mature content fantasy, which is very different.
Yeah,
than
that's a very different vibe.
To.
Yeah.
All right. If you like Hunger Games, I might have some Rex.
Yeah.
Same way to get back into fantasy.
if you like Hunger Games, I can take some pictures of my bookshelf that if you care, like if you want that. But yeah, I think oh no, I've forgotten our main character's name.
Kathy Catherine.
Oh, that's right. It's another K name, and I said Katniss about 30 times.
It's a C.
Yeah. You know what? It's fine. No, I'm kidding. It's not fine. Yeah, no, that matters. Okay. Kathy with a C. Okay. Aspiring writer tip. What do we think? Do we have anything? I don't actually know for this one. I don't have a good idea.
I loved it. It was great. Sometimes.
That's not a tip, Rob.
I know.
Okay.
Well, what if the tip is something along the lines of, and I know this is something we all have to agree on, so it's not individual, but what if something along the lines of, going back to like the incest, right? One of the previous comments that was made was like, the book laid it out, we knew it was coming because it was kind of 200 pages of build up. And I guess for me, I'm like, let me not say my writer tip is like, how do you lessen that? And how do you just get to it? Like, how do you name it, or how do you make it much more strong that that's where it's going? Right.
So
with some of these things, but again, a tip.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like some of the themes, this book, I mean, just looking at the cover, looking at the title, knowing that it's about, a foray into the Fae world.
Yeah.
Those aren't spoilers.
And you'll have the purple one?
Yeah. The cover art is awesome. Cover art is great.
It's beautiful.
But none of our three main themes that are pretty serious, our three main traumas, our three main plot relevant traumas, none of that is hinted. And none of it is even hinted in the genre. Like, if I pull out, I kind of jokingly mentioned military sci-fi before, but if I have a book that is military sci-fi, I can kind of guess a little bit along the lines of what those themes are. I don't need somebody to separately tell me, hey, this probably includes somebody dying. This probably includes war. Like, I can guess that. But this book, this cover, this whole setup had nothing. For any of our major traumas.
A thing I want to say, because I don't quite want to let that stand without commentary. You're commenting on all of the stuff the author literally often doesn't have control over.
I mean, that's great. This does not have to be an author tip. This could be a publishing tip.
No, I know. I just want to say, like, generally speaking, unless you're self-published and hire the artist, authors generally can't control their titles. Like, they'll have their working title, they'll have what they want. But
that's a wild concept.
Yep, but if their publisher makes them go with something else, if publishing makes them go with something else, they have to go with something else. Like, please never write to an author and complain that you didn't like their title. Please. If they maybe didn't like it either.
That's kind of terrible. Can we change that industry-wide?
Yeah, they usually don't have any control over the cover art. Like, whether or not they have any ability to approve it will just depend on the individual publishing house. Your quibble about the genre of fantasy not being able to telegraph this, that's because fantasy is so huge. It's
Robin,
so huge.
I'm not saying it's not, but even with fantasy, there are certain traumas that are more prevalent. None of these three are in that list. And
I know I'm speaking not necessarily just to you, but like, we have an audience who might not already know these things. And
that's
so
true.
I'm making sure to say it.
Yeah, that's
fantasy
fair.
Is a very big genre, and it's hard to expect fantasy to telegraph that in the same way that it's easier to have sci-fi telegraph it. And this is where I say, the Trigger Warnings Wiki is your friend.
Also the story graph.
Also the story graph. The story graph and the Trigger Warnings Wiki, they'll help get you out of situations like this where you are not sure if this 200 pages of slow burn is leading to incest or not. Just go to Book Trigger Warnings. I believe it's booktriggerwarnings.com. Give me one sec.
Can we make this just an industry tip then and say, hey, maybe let's make some of these major... And it doesn't mean you have to list everything that happens in a book, but if you have a pretty major trauma that can be pretty traumatic to people, and it doesn't automatically come in context, and your art doesn't hint at it, and your genre doesn't give you context to know to expect it, we need an industry thing that is not reliant on a third-party source, aka another website.
Good news for you. I have good news for you because I'm the one who spends all day on author Twitter.
Okay.
A lot of authors are beginning to push for and then have content warnings in their books and content warnings on their websites.
All right, cool. Okay, so great. Then that's already happening. That happening is good. More, but it is happening. And I don't want to leave the impression that like it's not happening or something. It's just, in the meantime, booktriggerwarnings.com. Please contribute warnings for a book that you have read. Look it up if you need to for a book you haven't read yet. You can even search it to find books that have a trauma you're trying to find. Like, if you needed to find books that had a particular thing, you can even do that. But yeah, like I would say many authors are asking for the things that you're asking for. Okay, good.
Right
so
now.
That's
like these conversations are active and happening by the people who are in publishing and are authors and I don't know how easy it is for them to do it, but they definitely have a better shot than we who are literally technically not in the industry.
Oh, absolutely.
Technically, we're just not in it.
Yeah.
But yeah, like it's changing. Like there's I have now read several books that had the content warnings in the actual book.
Okay, good.
So, yeah. So anyway.
All right. Last thing.
Favorite non-traumatic thing about the book. We to like calm, relax, say a thing we liked. We all say a thing we liked.
Well, I talked about this before, but for me, I talked about it before we started recording.
Oh, yeah.
But I don't know what to call them, the introductory text to the chapter, right? So the different quotes from different works of literary canon, literary white canon to be specific. But and so I commented before that it just brought me back to like high school English class. I'm like, whoa, 15, 20 years later, all this stuff is like, there. I'm like, there's Shakespeare, there's like Percy Shelley. And it was so weird because I forget what I think it might have been, I don't know where it was from, but I remember reading that piece and I was like, I've read this before. Where is it from? And then I got to the end and it's like Percy Shelley. I was like, whoa. I like literally remember my sophomore year high school English class reading this specific text. So it made me feel smart. It always makes me, I was just commenting to my partner that I'm like actually a lazy reader, which is why I love young adult and poetry, which I know people think is like a lot to read, but for me it just comes naturally. So maybe it's not lazy or not lazy. It's
my wife literally is a poet. We're no dissing of poetry. No, that's nice. Yeah. Read a thing you like reading.
Yes, those are my favorite things. Are kind of the introductory vignettes to the chapter.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, those are cool.
I did like those. I like the description of the sun.
Ooh,
I mean, secondarily, I really liked the Goblin Market, but I'm like, yes, the Goblin Market, one of my favorite Fae things. It is here again in this book. The Goblin Market. Also, Queen Mab. Hey, Queen Mab. Nice to see you again in a different book. I read a lot of books with Fae, and so I recognize a lot of these particular names. But the Pendulum Sun is new. I haven't seen that elsewhere. I don't know that it's nowhere, but I definitely haven't seen it. And I like it. Liked thinking about what that would do. There's also a bit where they end up referring to that people will be safe anywhere the light of that sun touches. And I'm like, you've told us that sun goes a very circuitous path. I'm not sure if they're safe as many places as they think they are. But anyway, I like the pendulum sun.
I loved the sea whale concept.
Oh, the sea whale.
That was so a very vivid image in my head. I can picture what that would be. I have my own headcanon for different sea whales from different sea depth levels that would have different flora and fauna. And I have different whale types that hunt at different depths that I think would be very cool to be illustrated with containing the sea of that depth. And that was cool. And yeah, that's definitely my favorite thing, because that gave me a visceral image of like, this is what this looks like.
The adventure part, I love.
I don't actually want to spoil it. Don't tell you what it is, because I want anyone that reads this to get there and be like, oh, cool.
No. I wasn't going to say what it is. I was just going to say, no, we don't get all the descriptions of
whales from different depths broad. It's so broad, but it makes sense. But it's such a clear, concise.
It's a really good piece
It's a clear, concise, non-specific description that lets your imagination decide exactly what that whale is composed of. And that was great.
Yeah. Can I add one quick other favorite thing?
Yeah,
sure.
I don't know if you all caught this, but did you all catch the Hamilton reference in one of the sentences?
No.
It was like literally, it's a word for word from a line in Hamilton. I think it's something, and I wish I would have marked it, but it's like, I think it's like, I know my sister like my own mind or something like that. It was like word for word, a line from Hamilton. And I was like, what the F?
No, I did. I do remember that.
And I remember, I'm really good at, I don't have a photographic memory, but I remember.
It was Kathy talking to, oh my God, where's my.
It's on the left side. I remember it being on the left side.
It is.
I always remember that with books. I always remember what side of the book things are on. And I've been kind of like trying to.
Yeah, I have listened to half of Hamilton once, so I am no help to you two in finding where in the book this is. But reader, it's in the book somewhere.
It's in the book somewhere.
I found the conversation. Hold on.
Oh, wait, what page is it?
I think it's chapter 10. And I think it's very close to page 100.
Oh, no. I was thinking, I might have to find
it might be a different spot.
Yeah.
This conversation, I know.
The latter half.
So anyway, it's in there
right,
somewhere.
I have to find that, because it's, I did catch that, and that was interesting.
This is one of those, silently flipping pages is great podcast
That's
content.
Okay, I edit that silence out. That does not make it to the final cut.
But yeah, so thank you so much for joining us. Hugh, tell our audience where they can find you. Plug your pluggables.
Yes. Again, my name is Luis from the Courting in Color podcast. So our website is www.courtingincolor.com. And then Instagram and Twitter, we are Court, the letter N, and then Color, COLOR.
And again, thank you so much. This was a lot of fun. We had a very lively discussion, which was great. And audience, we will catch you in a fortnight. All music used in this podcast was created by Nicole as Heartbeat Art Co. and is used with permission.
You can follow us on Twitter at Books That Burn, all one word.
You can email us with questions, comments, or book recommendations at booksthatburn@yahoo.com.
Support us on patreon.com/booksthatburn. All patrons get access to our upcoming book list and receive a one-time shout-out.
You can leave us an iTunes review. This helps people to find the show.
And find us on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Thanks for listening. We'll be back in 2 weeks.